Hello and welcome to Happiness Now. Today I'm interviewing Kyle Hilding from the YouTube channel The Spiritual Download. Today Kyle will be speaking with me about consciousness, meditation, God, spirituality, and how we can find more peace and happiness in life. So please welcome with me a very inspiring guest, Kyle Hilding. So hello Kyle and welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Rob. I'm really excited to have this conversation and have people from all over the world listen to this. So thank you.
Yeah, it's an amazing opportunity, isn't it, Kyle, to get together like this and discuss things. So I've been looking at your channel. You've got some awesome stuff there, Kyle. So maybe tell us your story. How did you become so spiritual?
I would say it started when I was a teenager. In high school, I was really into sports. Growing up, everything was sports for me. Um, and there was one day where I just kind of realized that maybe the game didn't matter, or maybe the competitiveness, really it was the competitiveness of sports that made me feel really disconnected. It felt a little bit too animal-like or warrior-like for me, and I was much more gentle. Um, at that time, I'd also found a friend. He met a friend. He was from Somalia originally, and I got to know his family. I would go over and sleep over. During Ramadan, I would break fast with them and just drink tea, and just got to know a completely different culture. And I grew up in a small rural town in Minnesota, so it was kind of rare to have a friend who was of a different race, of a different religion. So that really opened my eyes to see that there was more to the world than just the white privilege that I grew up in. And that started to push me towards kind of thinking existentially, like, what is the purpose of life? Why is there suffering? That was a big one for me, was why is there racism? Why is there suffering? And I would stay up really late at night just thinking about these things. And it made it really hard to go to school the next day after, being awake until 3 a.m. So then I really questioned the validity of, like, why do I need to go to school? Where I was starting to read things like Martin Luther King Jr. I was starting to ask the biggest questions in life, and I wasn't finding those answers from my high school teachers. And so I didn't really know where to look besides my own mind. So I just began to trust this. I didn't know what it was at the time, but kind of this subjectivity, this inner world, much more than the outside world, I would say. And that kind of pushed me to, so in my senior year of high school, I moved. I had turned 18 the summer before high school. I moved to Minneapolis, where I was, it was like 70% African American at this school. I was one of the few white boys in my whole class. I played football on the team, and just got to know a wide variety of kids. And then also, like, the independence, living in my own apartment in a totally new environment in the urban area. I had never been there before. So I just started to, like, really want to stretch my comfort zone at that time, knowing that I had a deep connection. My subjective experience of what I now know is, like, just consciousness, was the connection I had with everything around me. I can say these with words now, but before it was just this intuitive sense of, I need to go explore the world. I really, really need to go explore how others experience life, how others live, and maybe experience happiness or suffering. And that kind of speeding up the story a little bit. I went to college and majored in philosophy. I wasn't really looking for getting a job immediately after college. I wanted to take classes that I found the most interesting. And philosophy was extremely important for my spiritual background, just being able to map out all of these biggest ideas. However, one, I guess maybe negative thing was it made me really heady. Everything was just mental exercise rather than diving into my own body, my own soul, my own heart. I got a little bit of that in philosophy, but really not too much besides like a Buddhist philosophy class that I took. And then right after college, I moved to Ecuador in South America just to have a huge living abroad experience. Just some of the books I've read, people I've listened to, they say the importance of going to explore the world. And I knew that's what I wanted to do after college. I didn't really want to go get a master's degree or start a job immediately. And it was in Ecuador that I discovered like who I really truly am. I discovered my passion for teaching there. I discovered my passion for exploration just by myself as well. I've traveled by myself multiple times. That kind of gave me the courage to be a free bird in this world. Just kind of going it alone and trusting the world that, I'm not going to get injured or, anything drastic is not going to happen to me just traveling alone, even in a third world country. Also, learning Spanish was a big challenge to overcome as well. And then I came back to Minnesota after a year and a half of that, and that's when I started my channel because I wanted to express what I've experienced, what I've thought. And at that time, I was really into literature and poetry. So I started, some of my earliest videos is me reading some poetry or reading from like a Spanish author. Also, I had accumulated like 16 pages of huge questions from my philosophy major. And one of my videos, I just like read some of those big questions. So that's how my YouTube channel started. It was first called The Library of Humanity because it had kind of a philosophy kind of bend to it, very mental, as if like the Library of Humanity kind of, it represents the knowledge of all of humanity. So I was really into knowledge and truth at that time. But then there was a transition about a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, that deep down I knew that it's about spirituality in my life. That's the number one solid rock foundation. And so I switched to the spiritual download. And that's when I really found my niche on video podcasting on YouTube and started, my website and things like that. So now everything's kind of snowballing into who I am now. So
you felt a disconnect as a child. Do you feel a connection now with the universe, with God?
Yes. I wouldn't even, it's even hard to say, like as a child, I felt actually very connected. I just didn't know how to put words to it. And there wasn't anybody else in my life at the time that I could talk about such ideas with. Part of it was just being, an angsty teenager, not knowing who to turn to. But actually, I realized in those staying up really late nights, I realized that I started to realize that the like reality wasn't just material. It was there was some sort of like dreamness to it. And like I would even see like, I don't even know, I mean now I would call them entities. I didn't know what they were at the time, kind of coming in and out of my room, and the walls in my room would move, like they would shape shift, like in depth and width, and that really made me question like what is reality really. So a lot of it was experiential, and I didn't have the words to put anything to that at that time. So
It's quite difficult, isn't it? I mean, I was quite sad as a child at school, and until a teacher came along, Mr. Clark, he gave me a book on philosophy. That started my journey. So I had a kind of similar experience myself. But they don't teach it at school, do they, Kyle? You're a teacher yourself. Do you think they should be teaching spirituality at school?
that's a good question. And yeah, I'm very passionate about teaching such ideas to students. I even think in public school, it can be definitely one of the main focuses, actually. My belief with education, I think that self-actualization, I think that everything should be based off of the Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Because, some students, they come from difficult backgrounds. Their needs are much more like at the red or orange level, where they need to feel secure. They need to have enough food to eat, enough healthy food to eat, for that matter. But then there's other kids that I know in town. They're looking to go to some private college. Their parents are professors at the college here in town, and they're looking for a little bit higher on the hierarchy of needs. So it's like, why do we put these kids in the same class with the same teacher, and I'm forced to teach the same curriculum? I would see it much more mixed in like where students are in the high school, and like what they're doing and who they're with. And I think everything should be very student centered rather than teacher centered, or even a lot of it is there's power at the top and the power kind of trickles down, and it's very hierarchical like that, unfortunately still today. I think in the near future, I think education is going to have a huge shift around the world towards a student-centered learning, and seeing the student as a whole person rather than just seeing them as a number on your list, like, oh, are they here, or are they not here? It's like, no, students are there to explore. I think exploration is key to a good education.
I think meditation's an important practice to teach children as well, isn't it? I wish I would have had meditation as a child. I only discovered it in adult life, but to be able to teach children how to meditate and then to master the mind as we're growing up, it would make us much happier as well as more productive in life, and so on and so on, wouldn't it?
Absolutely. So I actually teach this class called AVID. The acronym is Advancement via Individual Determination. And so actually that's kind of like a homeroom class for students who are on the edge of going to university or not. And I've taught them meditation, actually. And even though I teach in a public school, I got the permission from my principal to do that. So I taught them the basics of self-inquiry, which, you could say that comes from like, oh, that's a yogic practice, or that comes from some guru. But, I did some research, and it's actually very secular, doesn't require any sort of spiritual language, but of course it's like, a great spiritual practice. But I think self-inquiry should be required high school material to study. Just studying yourself. It's a scientific method for understanding your own consciousness and your own psychology. And then I would also say mindfulness is another key tool, just being able to go into your body and do a body scan, relax at each muscle, and then kind of sit there and observe. And then that's kind of when self-inquiry practice could happen. So I think mindfulness and self-inquiry should be required in school.
No, I absolutely agree. I've come to the conclusion self-inquiry, becoming aware of awareness, is the highest form of searching for happiness, would you say?
Yeah, definitely. It's referred to as the highest practice, or the most direct, as they say. And that one, I think, is a pretty magical one for a lot of people, because it brings them directly to this place where they know that they've been their whole life. It's like, if I would have learned self-inquiry junior year of high school, I've been like, yes, this is much more, it's more tangible, because you're just like, yeah, this is who I am. It's much more practical, like, yeah, that I'm actually learning something here, and it's experiential. It's not some idea of where, I'm forced to learn something that the teacher doesn't even explain why we're learning it, which I never really understood. Because some teachers are there for the job. I mean, I'm not saying that that's a bad thing necessarily, to have a job, work a 9 to 5, and make money. But I think there's certain jobs out there, like police officers, doctors, teachers, where these need to be some of the most stand-up, respectable, ethical people in our society. These are the people who should be self-actualizing, because these are the people interacting with children, interacting with sick people, interacting with people in the street who might be dangerous. These are the careers that I think self-actualization and happiness need to be the central focus of these careers.
We see most problems, don't we, arising because people allow ego to get in the way. To remove the ego, these would be then great examples in society to protect us, to teach us.
The ego is a tough topic, because a lot of people haven't recognized their own ego from like a metacognitive perspective. When you're doing mindfulness or self-inquiry or meditation, you kind of step back and you have kind of a bird's eye view of reality more. And then you can see exactly like, oh, that's my ego. It's that voice in my head, or it's the thing that's telling me I should eat that brownie, but it gets more complicated than that. But that's just the first step, is seeing, oh, I can control my own life when I do recognize my ego from afar. And you can either see it as an enemy, or you can kind of see it as like something that you can work with. It's an ego is a survival mechanism, I think, for the human, that came up through evolution. And I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing. I actually do think it's a tool for spiritual awakening. But I think in the first few steps of spiritual practice, being able to see how your ego influences the bigger you, in self-inquiry, you start with the small s self, and then with years of practice, you experience the big S self. So it's seeing what is that difference, and which one am I truly.
Yeah, it's a case of identification, isn't it? Who do we identify ourselves as our limited ego, or as an infinite consciousness?
Right. And that's the thing, is it's infinite. And that's one of the main things I've discovered that has just continues to blow my mind, is just the infinitude, the infinity of everything. Everything that I thought was even tiny, like some things have such detail that it's like an infinite minuteness of detail. And then I realized that, like, yes, there's different levels of infinity, but at some point, like, it kind of circles back, like in the universe, things are so small that they become infinite, and things are so big that they become infinite, but that infinity is the horseshoe back to the oneness. No matter how small or how big something is, it horseshoes back to that infinite, I would call it kind of the substratum or the rock of existence, is that infinite consciousness. Yeah.
I've been looking at the present moment. This has been a practice I've been engaging in for over a year or two, maybe, and it's really becoming more and more exciting. The deeper I go, the more interesting it becomes. I'm convinced now that the now is infinite. There cannot be half of now. How long would the first half of now be? And when would that end? And when would the next now begin? Are you familiar with this teaching, Eckhart Tolle?
Yeah, Eckhart Tolle was the first spiritual book that I read that was explicitly for mindfulness meditation that I studied. I found a book just on the street there in Ecuador, started reading it. It was in Spanish, but luckily I could decently understand most of it at the time. But yeah, that's a really important thing to study, is mindfulness meditation. And that book, is called The Power of Now.
Yeah.
And at that time I didn't really know what the present moment actually was because I lived in my mind so much. But now, yeah, I definitely see that nothing is actually outside of the now. That everything is an aspect of the now. It's just a matter of your mind attaching to certain parts of the now. Because in the now, there are things happening, but a lot of the things that are happening are attached to just how we interpret all of that's happening. So if we live a little bit more in the now itself, we just kind of witness, we kind of just watch these phenomena happening, and they can be really happy, they can be full of suffering, but there is like this central point. It's not even central, it's actually the everywhereness that's outside of time and space, that everything is happening inside of, that our minds and humanness, get attached to. Even the good, also we get attached to.
So going back a little bit to self-inquiry, maybe explain that to people, Kyle, and how does that relate to becoming spiritual? And would you define that as being spiritual practice?
Yes. So self-inquiry is one of the first meditations that I began because I heard of Ramana Maharshi, who's one of the most famous gurus. I would say probably the most awakened being that I've read about. And so self-inquiry. So inquiry means investigation into the self. So the self, at first, you begin questioning, or you simply, I taught my students, you sit quietly, and on the exhale, you ask yourself either who am I or what am I? I would encourage people to ask themselves what, or like, what am I? Because if you ask yourself, who am I? Even though that's the question that we usually ask, you're looking for the idea of yourself. If you ask, who am I, right? Because in the class I was teaching, that was the first unit. Let's start with who am I, our personality. We talked about the Enneagram. We talked about Myers-Briggs. So that's a lot has to do with your human self, your personality, or your like what career do you want in the future? That's the question for young people. Who do you want to be? But I think even more important than that is investigating this I, right? So this I, or me, is actually the central point of everything in your experience, right? You say, I am hungry. I want to go to lunch. What do I want for dinner? I want to see my friends. So everything's actually, even in language, not just your experience, everything is central upon the I am. So Ramana Maharshi taught, stick with the I. So it's actually seeing the seer rather than always seeing the seen, meaning there's all these objects of the world or of the mind that we see or that we sense or experience. But it's actually, how can we live in the ocean of consciousness rather than focus too much on all of these waves that seem separate, but the waves are the ocean.
I was in a class once, Kyle, and a student asked the Buddhist monk, he said, am I the center of the universe? And the teacher, the Buddhist monkey, replied, what universe is that? And this is it, isn't it? We all project our own universe, our own reality. So would you say, how important is it then that people don't relate to the external world as being inherent? It depends upon the mind, doesn't it?
Yeah, I believe that everything that deals with the human mind, which is actually even more powerful than your body, I would say, has to do with stories. Mythology is so interesting to study, like the hero's journey. Joseph Campbell, he studied all of these myths across history and came up with the hero's journey is like the core of the human mind, because that's what all of these histories were talking about. And so that's kind of the story of the mind, is the hero's journey, which I think is very important, is the journey of your human self in this lifetime. I do think is extremely important. And I don't think that it's, even though yes, it's a dream, like everything is a dream, or everything in life is like a video game, I would say, more like a first person video game. But I don't want to say that it's not important. It's both. I say a lot, often, that everything is kind of both and. Like, yes, everything is consciousness, and in a certain sense, human life is meaningless, and that what's really real is the peaceful consciousness itself. That's the most real thing on that level. But we do experience, all of us do experience our human self, even though, albeit, it's a story. And I do think the story is important to become the best, basically become the best video game player that you can be, so that you understand this dream, right? When we are dreaming, it feels really good for the dream to become very vivid, or to become very lucid, because then we can understand the dream more. If we're just kind of being tossed around in the dream, and we're brought to all these experiences that we're getting attached to in the dream, we don't really know what the dream is about then. So I think that's true with life, is trying to become lucid in life, having it be a vivid dream. And I think the best tool is meditation. But there's lots of other tools to begin with, at least, for people to start to live a more lucid type of video game life.
So, what kind of meditation do you use then, in particular?
Yeah, so like I mentioned, I started with Zen. That's what I started with, just sitting quietly. Then I learned self-inquiry. Now I do a variety of 3 techniques, kind of sticking with one now. But I began doing Kriya Yoga about 2 years ago. So I learned a lot about like breathing properly. I learned a lot about the chakra system, which is behind me here. My mom actually painted this for me. And then I do a practice called Ascension. I learned Ascension from Ishtar Howell. I don't know if you've heard of Ishtar. So yeah, he was interviewed on Buddha at the Gas Pump. I'm a big Buddha at the Gas Pump listener myself. And so I ended up interviewing Ishtar on my channel. And then me and my friends did a long, like an online weekend retreat during quarantine, right at the beginning of quarantine. So I learned Ascension. And then about a year ago, well, like 9 months ago, I found Craig Holiday. I don't know if you've heard of Craig Holiday. He's from a tantra or tantric tradition from Sri Aurobindo. And that meditation I've been doing for sure weekly, but that's kind of more my sit down daily practice more and more now. Whereas before I was doing Kriya Yoga for sit down, and then Ascension kind of just throughout my day. That was my open-eyed practice, as they say. But I would catch myself in the dream, right? But the idea of Ascension is that you kind of bring it back to the pure big awareness, or really what's important. So I kind of generally mix between those 3. I don't know what my goal is. If right now, do I find just one, or do I continue working and learning from all 3? I haven't quite figured that part out yet, but I don't. That's just something in the future for me to think about, I think. So.
How important is the meditation break, Kyle? Because if we meditate for, say, 1 hour a day, we've got another 23 hours. So, what would you suggest people do in the meditation break?
Mm, really good question. So I would go back to what I've learned from Ryan Kurzak in Kriya Yoga is so being a yogi is not just about meditation. It's about how you've organized your life. So it's a very progressive path. It's about um, are you living a simple life that gives you joy is the main question. A lot of people look for emotional complexity in their life, like they want a lot of success or a lot of money, a lot of fame, a big family, which that stuff isn't bad necessarily. It's just very distracting. It's very distracting. So I've really begun to like simplify my life. I still have a job and things like this, still have a lot of friends, a big family myself. So I'm a busy person. But just kind of when I'm home alone, I live alone. I usually just find myself going for a long walk outside in the woods or meditating, doing yoga, or conversing with somebody on Zoom. So I just find myself doing very quiet things that don't complicate the mind. They don't bring your mind on all these loops. They call that monkey mind. So just kind of organizing your life so that you don't have that much monkey mind during the day. And then I would encourage an open-eyed practice, basically, where you catch yourself in the monkey mind. And then you just kind of bring yourself back to that awareness. There's lots of practices for that. Self-inquiry is a great one. So, but the thing is, I don't know what to tell people, what they should and shouldn't do as well. Because what I've really found in my path is that everybody has a unique path. And everything happens in the right time. And I don't believe there's any, Trevor Hall, one of my favorite musicians, says there's no rush in your healing. That the process of healing, which I would call healing, I would call that spirituality. Everything is about healing, but I don't particularly like using the word healing. But in the spiritual journey, things happen at the right time. And I know it's hard to say that for people who, they might say, oh, I want enlightenment this year, but they kind of sounds like they're in a rush a little bit. So really just kind of not trying to rush things is important. And then not saying, and then not claiming that there's only one way that you have to be, and that being yourself is completely okay. And actually that's the point, is to be yourself. What are you? Who are you genuinely? And what are you searching for? What are you finding? I think asking yourself, diving into your own mind, into your own consciousness is the practice. And there's people out there that you can use as resources. But sometimes that gets into attachment itself, right? Where the guru gets attached to his own ego, his or her own ego. That can happen. I don't believe that there's anybody out there that's absolutely perfect, because they wouldn't be human. But there are a lot of things to learn from a guru or a spiritual teacher, that they can show you the traps, but finding a guru or a teacher that you just know in your heart is it's the right situation, rather than seeing them as, oh, I like, for example, some people who are on the spiritual path unfortunately have had difficult pasts where their parents maybe weren't around. They never had that father figure or that mother figure, and they might be searching for that in their guru. And it's not that they're only learning spiritual material from this guru, they're also seeking some sort of motherly or fatherly figure, which that could lead to some sort of shadow self or unhealthy relationship with the guru, where it should be an adult and an adult, a fully mature adult with an adult who is seeking full maturity.
It's so important, isn't it? I mean, there's false teachers out there. We know, we've seen this in the world. But this goes back to what we were saying earlier, what you were saying earlier, Kyle. Self-inquiry is experience. So it's something that we can rely on and trust.
Absolutely. That's what I've began to trust wholeheartedly is my own consciousness. Because like I said, at the center of my consciousness is my heart and my intuition and my gut feeling. And the three teachers that I've learned meditation from, I just have a gut feeling. I just know that they are the teachers for me. They just align with how I see spirituality. And it's not just in the mind, but it's also in the heart. So I say trusting your intuition, trusting your heart, and listening to them more and more rather than that monkey mind. And that's something I'm working on myself. I find myself with subtle addictions still. Those don't go away very fast. You actually have enlightenment experiences much faster than getting over all of your subtle addictions and all of your psychology. I think getting over your psychology and finding a really, really healthy psychology is a lifetime, takes a whole lifetime. So I think some lifelong meditators actually, it's possible that they haven't fully worked out their psychology just through meditation. So I think that's actually a correlated practice, but it's actually a little bit different from just meditation in the stillness and silence. That's super important. That's actually the foundation, is the stillness and silence. But then there's also this mastery of human psychology that we can also practice, namely your shadow self, the self that you've ignored before your spiritual practice, that now all of a sudden all these things are bubbling up. My past traumas or my past addictions, past girlfriends or boyfriends, things like this that we think while we're meditating in the stillness and silence, we think those things are gone. But there's so much that we carry in our bodies, in our central nervous system, that are like, wow, what was that? And so we're kind of healthfully releasing a lot of this in a spiritual environment, or a quiet environment, is really, really important.
I remember doing a retreat. It was a retreat in January, and I said to the teacher, my mind's really busy, like there's a lot of attachments coming up. And he said, your attachments have always been there. It's just because you've stilled the mind that you've noticed them. So kind of like social media, TV and so on, they distract us away from our everyday self. And it can become quite a shock, can't it, when someone begins to meditate?
Absolutely. And I've found that a lot of, it can happen where you blame yourself, or you view it as a bad thing for having these feelings and traumas. But it's actually nothing's our fault. I believe that there's stuff that's in there from our background that just happened to us. Even because if you think about it, before you began your meditation practice, we were just in the Maya, as they say, the illusion, the dream. We were just in the dream, and we were just being pushed around, really, by our own mind as well, and everyone else's minds. Kind of the collective shadow, or the collective unconsciousness. And then now you start your spiritual practice maybe when you're 25 or 35, and you're like, dang, there's a lot of stuff in here. There's a lot of stuff in my mind that I don't know what's going on. I think the first thing to do is to learn how to quiet your mind, quiet your body through yoga and exercise and stretching. And then that's actually when the practice begins, is when you become a pretty good meditator or a yogi. that's when spirituality really begins, because you're diving into your own psychology a lot. So and that's kind of where I'm at right now, is discovering my fullest potential, trying to see what is in the way of me becoming my greatest self, and doing that as honest as you possibly can. And that's something I'm working on, because one of my shadows is arrogance. One of the key things in my shadow is in the past. In Enneagram, I'm a type 5, and type 5s tend to be the thinkers who want to solve the world problems, but they have they don't really know how to be in a friendly conversation, and they think that's useless. Like, why do I need to go to a cocktail party and have these meaningless conversations with people? That's what I used to think. But now I see it as, okay, like, this is what humans do. Some humans really enjoy being social. And what can I learn from them? Like, coming from a really humble point of view, like, what can I learn from them? And there's like so many people out in society that we can learn from. Whereas before, I was thinking, oh, I'm the meditator, I'm the philosopher, I need to teach everyone. That's where I started from, and that's a tough road to begin on, because arrogance is one of the key things that really separates you from others. But now I learned a mantra saying that I am equal. I am absolutely equal to everyone. I am absolutely equal to everyone. And that really opened the doors to seeing that I can learn from everybody. There's everyone I can learn from, because everybody, I think, is, maybe they don't know it yet, but they are awakened, because they are their soul. And that's really humbling, because it's like, okay, just if we can get our egos a little bit out of the way, then our souls can shine. Which is funny, because in Spanish, soul means sun. So your soul is like el sol. It's like shining, from your heart. And I think that's the natural way. We were talking about happiness. That's what happiness is letting your soul and your spirit, letting your heart shine, and living from here. And this is I'm just talking to myself here. Less here and more here. I'm, in my heart.
I feel that's what meditation does, doesn't it? It brings the thinking down to the heart, so we feel a closer connection with others. I heard a nice thing, actually, Kyle. There's no such thing as coincidence. The reason we experience similar things is because we're one consciousness. How do you feel about that? What's your views on God and source and so on, Kyle?
Did you say source or souls?
Yeah, some people call God source, or enlightenment, whatever terminology we use. What's your views on the higher self, the higher being?
So, firstly, God is a word, and there's a lot of heavy attachment, or a lot of I would call it history. There's a lot of history to the word God, which comes from Christianity mostly. I'm a history teacher at the high school, so just a quick history lesson is, it came from the Christians, who became the most dominant force in Europe, for over 1,000 years. And that literally everybody in Europe was Christian, or they were forced to be Christian. That's why the Spanish Inquisition happened, trying to kick out all of the Jews and the Muslims out of Spain in 1492. So there's lots of, and then Europe was the most dominant continent during that time. They're the ones that colonized everywhere else in the world, rather than the reverse. One of the most important books I've read is called Guns, Germs, and Steel by Jared Diamond. That was the question in the book, was why were the Europeans the ones who colonized all these other continents rather than the reverse? That was the big question in the book. And the answer basically was geography. But I guess the point I'm saying is Christianity was spread across the world as a proselytizing, meaning that Christianity, the central goal in Christianity is to spread the word of God. And that can be interpreted in many ways. And at that time, which I would call stage blue in spiral dynamics, but basically what that means is the stage in consciousness at which we were at the time was patriarchy, which is sexism, racism, colonization, basically the exploitation of Mother Earth. We were living in a very ancient, or I would call it just a medieval mindset at that time. So the idea was, oh, we're gonna go to other continents and force, the Bible or force the word of Jesus upon other people. And that was done by force, like I mentioned. And so that mentality continues today, and not just from Christian religion, but from many other world religions. There's an unhealthy shadow aspect of religions, because I don't believe religions are inherently bad, nor are they inherently good. They just are. But one of the shadows with religions is proselytizing and trying to force others to believe in a certain thing. So for a lot of people, the word God has that connotation, especially if you were forced as a child to go to a Christian church, or to be Muslim or be a Hindu and being forced to believe in a certain thing. And so I think it's very important to go beyond the word God, and you might need to use a different word, is basically what I'm saying. And one of my practices, it's actually your goal is to find the correct word for that for you. So for some people, it might be consciousness. For others, it might be source. For others, it might be infinity. I tend to think of God. I personally use the word God, but for me, it's the infinite, absolute. So it's infinite, it's absolute, it's everywhere, it's nowhere, and it's right here, and it's made of peaceful love.
Kyle, it sounds like you're talking about consciousness.
Yes.
Papa G says this, doesn't he? The late Papa G from India. He says, we are God. We are God. We are one source. And this was my second question, wasn't it? There's no such thing as coincidence. We experience similar things because we are just one consciousness, and we're seeing the same things because we're the same mind.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I believe that everything happens for a reason. I do believe that there is free will on this plane of consciousness, the physical world. I think, again, we're living in a video game on planet Earth, and that we have free will, we have choices that we can make. And actually, the more that you wake up in the meditation and in your spirituality, you realize that you begin to have more free will, actually. Whereas before you thought you had a lot of free will, you're making all these choices. But a lot of it was being pushed by the monkey mind to do certain addictions that you've had, subtle addictions. But when you kind of step back a little bit more, you're able to see the free will that you do have. But then you also can recognize where you don't have free will. And so that's for you to find out. I can't tell you where you do and don't have free will. I could just talk from my experience where I believe I do, or I believe I don't. But I do believe that there is some. I've heard of the metaphor of the wheel, the bike wheel. So when you go a little bit more into the center of the wheel, more towards the axle, through meditation, you're in the center of your awareness, it's pretty still. You're still moving around. There's still some movement, but it's going not very fast in the center of the wheel. But when you go towards the end or the edge, the tire of the wheel, the wheel of samsara, then you're just being brought around and you're going fast, 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 and it leads to attachments, sufferings, pain, or even getting attached to things like success and money as well. So really the goal is to become centered, centered in your heart, in your own awareness, and seeing people as beautiful shining light rather than some annoying person on the road,
So Kyle, you're working on a future project now, aren't you, I believe?
Yes. So on top of my YouTube channel, I'm actually working on a book. It's going to be about self-actualization. I'm going to call it absolute self-actualization. Not to say that, it's the end all be all, but, I learned self-actualization, comes from Maslow's hierarchy of needs. But in the self-actualization theory, there's not much of a list that talks about, what is the ultimate thing that a human being can be, the ultimate way of being that a person or a human could be, given that I've studied gurus and teachers that I believe are way beyond just what Maslow was talking about. And so I'm saying, like, what's that next level beyond just what Maslow is talking about? What's that next level of potentiality that a human could become, given lifelong meditation practice, lifelong discovery of their own psychology, lifelong life of peaceful love, plus where the whole human all of humanity is going in the near future, which that's something I could talk about as well. But that's really my big question in the book, and it's going to read a little bit like a pop philosophy book. I'm going to talk about myself a little bit in the book, but it's more just listing, not just listing, but describing these characteristics of an absolutely self-actualized human. And the purpose of the book is to see it from a human perspective. A lot of spiritual teachings are from the perspective of the God perspective or the consciousness perspective, and starting from the finish line. I guess my argument in the book is going to be to start from the start, and most people start at the ego mind. So how do you start from the monkey mind and then continuing on that line, that path towards absolute self-realization, absolute love, absolute consciousness.
Do you know when the book will be finished, Kyle?
I'm hoping, maybe by the end of the year, but it might take until about spring.
Excellent. So I have to ask then, where do you believe humanity is headed?
Good. That's a really big question. I would say in the short term, there's going to be lots of uncertainty. There's going to be a lot of fear, I would say, in the near term. But that just gives all the reason to stick with your spiritual practice, because being firm in your awareness, being firm in your peaceful self, is how you be a kind of a spiritual warrior, I would say. Being a spiritual warrior into the future, where you can deal with any circumstances. And the main way to be a spiritual warrior is faith. Basically, faith in consciousness, faith in God, if you will, but really trusting that everything is going to be okay, and trusting the process of your spirituality, and that you're going to be steadfast in peaceful awareness. And I think in the long term, I think we're going to be heading towards a beautiful future. But that's what I see.
Love it, Kyle. Spiritual warriors. I love that. So before we say goodbye and ask Kyle for his final thoughts, please make sure you check out Kyle's YouTube channel, The Spiritual Download. You can also find Kyle on Facebook and Instagram. So Kyle, before I ask you for your final thoughts, could I just invite the viewers to subscribe and hit the notification bell? If you're enjoying this video, then each week I interview people, inspiring guests, just like Kyle. So if you're enjoying the video, please subscribe. And with that being said, Kyle, please could you leave the viewers with some final thoughts?
I would say, nobody's perfect. I certainly am not perfect. There's lots of ups and downs to life. But I think, like I mentioned, is living from your heart and seeing the heart in others is really, it's a simple practice, and it sounds easy, but I think that is the practice, is living in your own heart and seeing the heart in others, and even plants and animals as well. But so I see that as, like I said, our future, and also the practice.
Wonderful. Thank you, Kyle. Thank you to everyone watching, and I'll see you in the next video. And again, thank you, Kyle. Thank you for coming on today. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you, Rob.